So I just finished Resident Evil 3 Remake or reimagining, whatever you want to call it. I want to start out with saying that it's not a terrible game, it's just not a very good one. From the environments being linear with a few exceptions to the puzzles being almost non-existent. And the relatively short length of the game had me shocked at the end. This can't be it. That's it? Bro, it took me longer to make the fucking ammo for this fight. It took me 4.5 hours to beat this game on my first playthrough, with a total playtime being around 6 hours. A game that came out for $60 at launch. I'm having trouble rationalizing to myself if it's even worth $30, which is the price I paid for it because it was on sale. Now, can a game be worth full price and be short? Yeah, sure, but this is definitely not one of those. I can't stress just how short this game feels, but besides its length, it has other issues. The whole opening feels like a missed opportunity with the apartment sequence. It could have been done better, but it just really boils down to Nemesis busting through your wall and is relegated to mostly a cutscene. It was a foreshadow of things to come. The level design here is lacking to say the least. Besides a few key areas, everything else feels, well, just dull. I don't mean the art style either. I'm strictly talking about the layout of most locations. The first area you explore is pretty good. I mean, the streets of Raccoon City in RE3 really do convey the destruction of this Midwestern town and the chaos that ensues while the zombies shamble the streets looking for yet another poor soul to devour and welcome them to the ranks of the undead. I was in awe and my mind raced as to which parts of the city streets and back alleys I would get to explore. It ended up being like 2 whole blocks. Now, that would have been fine if this was just an area to help you get used to the game while teaching you the mechanics and how puzzles work. And yeah, I'm gonna get to the whole puzzle thing later. This wasn't that. I mean, not really. It was way too condensed, with sections cut out or cut down, and the bar now being just a cutscene, where before you could actually explore it. After the initial opening, you don't even run into any people on the streets. They're just simply gone. You eventually encounter Nemesis again, and he chases you throughout the streets of Raccoon City as you try to get the train running to get yourself and the other survivors out of this nightmare. This is the only part of the game where this happens, and worst of all, it feels very scripted. I want to highlight just how key items are placed in this location. They are literally right next to where they need to be used. Even the fire hose is just laying on the ground in the subway office. And yeah, you can use the bolt cutters and the lockpick in this area to acquire other items, but those items aren't necessarily needed to actually progress. It just kind of feels like everything is laid out for you. Now this gets to my other gripe with the game. The locations. I'll just get to the point. The locations have been drastically cut. The clock tower is now completely gone. Well, you do make it into the clock tower, kind of. You make it inside the gate. And you do find a brochure that describes the inside of the clock tower in the game, so that counts for something, right? I'm sure they must have had a meeting about this during the pre-production stages of the game, and I'm sure they must have known how much the RE3 fanbase loved this part. So to cut it seems like a strange choice. Every location seems condensed and disjointed. A lot of them are separated by cutscenes, and after that they are closed off. This makes it feel like your progress is very linear and turns the game into almost a level-based affair as opposed to a progress-based one. Now, not everything is a total miss here. The Carlos sections in the RPD and especially the hospital were very good in my opinion. It's basically the same premise for the hospital where you have to find a cure for Jill who was infected by Nemesis, while another subplot is added in which Carlos tries to find a doctor who came up with the cure and detain him as per Umbrella's orders. This is how the rest of the remake should have been done, by refining and expanding the basic plot points and areas of the game. It's shocking how they got it right with this one part, but managed to, for the most part anyways, mangle the rest of the game. But alas, you get to the end of the hospital section and you're greeted with
Zombie Horde Mode,
where you have to kill the zombies that are breaking in through the lobby while Tyrell, a fellow UBCS mercenary and Carlos's friend, tries to close the shutters. You can tell the game engine was not optimized for this, considering how the zombies explode almost comically into what looks like red jam and disappear into the floor in this section. Besides that though, this game does look damn good. What this engine managed to do in the Resident Evil 2 remake amazed me. And amazes me still here in the Resident Evil 3 remake. It does have its quirks, mainly being the screen space reflections which are borderline broken and the zombies that render in at what looks like 15 FPS at a distance. Besides that, everything on display here is stunning. And on top of that, this runs at a nearly locked 60 FPS on consoles, which to me is kind of mind-blowing. I played this on my aging 1070 Ti and was able to get frame rates into the hundreds on high settings and see no issues at all besides a few hitches, but that could have been any number of things with regards to my PC. It's not the best at this point. The character models look great. The detail is truly a stunning thing to marvel at. The only thing that I notice is that sometimes the lip syncing seems off and it can really throw off a scene, but it's not the worst thing in the world. So, everything is great, right? Well, as you get further into the game, you'll start to notice a fair amount of reused assets from previous Resident Evil titles, like zombies, items, and so on. And you know what? On its own, that's not an issue for me. Although it starts to seem bad once you take that into account with the cut content. It seems like the only thing that got expanded here instead of getting cut was the story. One of the few things that didn't get caught up on the chopping block here was the story. It was actually alright. Well, they didn't add the scenario selection like the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis had, so I guess it got caught up a little, but what's here is good. Very minor characters from the original game got expanded upon and had more screen time. Carlos got more playtime because he's the one that enters RPD now instead of Jill, and therefore more character development occurs.
Now here's a weird fucking door. Leave it.
Marvin also makes a very small but important appearance, which makes you look back at what he said in the Resident Evil 2 remake, and it now resonates way more.
And don't make my mistake. If you see one of those things, uniform or not, you do not hesitate.
Yeah, it actually hits you pretty hard now. It also touched on how much the events of the Spencer Mansion affected Jill with her nightmares about being infected and having basically a pharmacy next to her bed.
Too many pills.
We know how this ends.
No, I don't.
They even managed to make Brad less of a coward, but I still remember what you did. They also made Nikolai into a more sinister character, bordering on a full-blown sociopath as he carries on with little to no regard for anyone but himself while seemingly almost enjoying the chaos.
It's not after me.
But story alone doesn't carry a game. It's an important part, but what about the gameplay here?
Shit's fired up.
Oh boy, this is where it gets really rough for me. Let's start with Nemesis. Nemesis is now only a catalyst for the progression of the story, and not the catalyst for how you actually play the game, as he's relegated to being a boss battle for most of it, and to cutscenes or very scripted events, as opposed to the bioweapon that stalks Jill as she tries to make her escape. And let me tell you, those boss battles are really not that good.
Video games of 2020, everybody. Right here. Right here.
The regular enemy encounters can be really bad as well. You'll notice some glaring issues at some point in the game. Like, what's going on here? This Hunter Gamma was supposed to die on the 5th shot. But because he was going through his animation, and Jill's hitbox was too close, it resulted in a death screen. I also encountered this weird camera glitch on my 3rd playthrough during the clock tower fight, where the camera was just getting too close to Jill's character model to the point where I almost couldn't see her on the screen. Luckily, the dodge mechanic made it into this remake, and it is definitely a fun thing to use. And Carlos now gets his own special counter move. And I must admit that it brought me nothing but joy every time I managed to pull it off. Unfortunately, most of the puzzles are now cut except for like 2 or 3 if you count the lift puzzle, and they are just such throwaway affairs that it's almost laughable. There is nothing here that challenges the player. It's a damn shame, because the feeling that you get from solving a puzzle on your own is absolutely incredible. And it's not just nostalgia, because confession time, I only recently played through the original Resident Evil 3, and you know what? It was pretty fucking amazing. And yeah, I know, I should have played through it a long time ago, no excuse. Resident Evil games are supposed to feel like each location is a puzzle box that you have to solve, like a fortress where you slowly chip away at the walls to progress further while trying to survive the nightmare happening around you. Well, at least the early Resident Evil games felt that way, which this is a remake of. The environments here are just so linear and no longer need proper planning to traverse, and rarely do you even need to use a map. This takes away from the core gameplay, because you're no longer expected to manage your resources, and on top of that, even if you do need to grab something from an item box, fear not, because there is literally a safe room at every turn. I really didn't want to make this video, because this isn't a bad game. It just missed the mark, and that's a shame. I heard a lot of people say that it's because the devs were lazy, and I don't think that's true at all. I think they just made some bad decisions early on, and those decisions carried on throughout the rest of the game's development. I don't know if it was because of deadlines or poor planning, and you know what? It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, this feels like a decently sized DLC, and that's the general consensus, and it's the right one. Should you play this? Yeah, it's worth a playthrough, but just know that if you loved Resident Evil 2 Remake, this simply does not match that caliber. Maybe that's what's colored my overall view of this game, comparing it to the one before it, but why wouldn't I? It also may have something to do with the original Resident Evil Remake, because that set the bar so high in how these things should be handled, with care. But that's it for my rantings. I just hope that the next remake is handled better. That's all. I just want to say thanks for checking out the video. This is the first video of this nature for me, so for everyone that stuck around till the end, thank you so much.